So this is part 3 of the chapter memory, and we're going to be talking about what we encode and some other ways of helping us remember things, and what do we do personally that helps us study better, remember better, so that we don't forget things. So uh, certainly we like to take meaning to things. We do imagery, visual imagery. We mentally organize information so that we can remember it more effectively. So, what we have to do is we take something and we want to give it meaning. So, we're processing verbal information for storage, and we encode its meaning by associating it with something we already know or imagine. That's really, really important. So we are literally using what's in our long-term memory bank bin to give us meaning, which we can use to encode new information. All right, so visual. Let's think about that. We struggle to remember formulas, dates, definitions, but we easily remember what we wore yesterday, our lunch menu, a party, things that we find much more interesting. Because what we do is when we remember a party or what we wore, we create visual imagery so we can literally see ourselves eating the food, but it's difficult to see ourselves understanding Piaget's theories. It's a difficult thing unless you're perhaps in a nursery school or a preschool. So it's difficult. So if you can take information and try to create visual imagery, it makes it a lot easier. So I'm going to say fireworks, infraction, concept, ice cream, delayed sunset. Now, I always ask this question, and the answer I'll say, tell me which one you remember. What words do you remember? And there's always somebody who's going to remember one of those odd words, but the majority of people say fireworks, ice cream, sunset. Why? Because they can visualize it. It's very difficult to visualize infraction. That's a difficult word to visualize. So uh, we have to work on that. So some of the techniques that we can use to help us remember things are mnemonic devices, and that's a Greek word for memory. So we can use these devices, such as maybe creating the first letters of an expression. If you went through Piaget's stages, maybe you would take each stage and take the first letter and make up some new word and try to visualize it. The one that they always used in school, and one of you is going to know it right off the top of your head. I don't remember it I don't remember it anymore. Is for how to remember your math operations. And then there's Aunt Sally's, I don't even know, but you know exactly what I'm talking about. So we certainly can use mnemonic devices to help us remember. And we can also organize information for encoding. We can process information more easily when we can organize it into meaningful units or structures, such as chunking. Okay, so we organize this information into familiar, manageable chunks. Chunking occurs so naturally that we actually take it for granted. We organize things into arrangements. So if I was going to talk about gardening and I divided it up, I could chunk it into like a vegetables, herbs, perennials, annuals, and I can easily, I don't need to think about that. I'm chunking it up into certain areas, which is a lot easier than saying gardening and going through the entire list of all the different plants that could be used. So um, we have that ability to chunk information. We also put things in hierarchies. So information is composed of broad concepts. Let's use the garden again. We divide it and subdivide it into narrow concepts and facts. So okay, let's use the garden. So we have garden at the top of our hierarchy, and then we're going to divide it. We can divide it into annuals and perennials. Perennials, they'll bloom every year, and annuals are only good for one season. But if I want to divide that down further, okay, so I'm going into more than just chunking. I would take my perennials and I could divide that into shade loving plants and sun loving plants, flowering, non-flowering. You get the drift, so you can do that. So you organize your information into groups and you'll remember that information easier. So let's talk about storage. Storage. If you recall something, you must have to have retrieved it from your long-term memory, unless it's just been staying in your working memory for the whole time. So that information lies dormant until you retrieve it. So what we have is we have a sensory memory, and we've used this terminology before, and we have a fleeting memory. So we're going to start pulling stuff out. We have a fleeting photographic memory, okay? So you remember the keys on the table? I literally can look at the keys on the table, and I will kind of take a picture of it, and then I can walk away and I can see that I have this fleeting memory. So this visual fleeting memory is called iconic memory. Only 1/10 of a second, and that's because your eyes are always moving, so they're always being replaced with another image. Iconic. So that's ICONIC, and you can remember it because it starts off with iconic. So you can picture that perfectly. And so then we have our echoic memory, and that's ECHOIC, and it starts with an E. So think of that as ear, echoic. So you can recover the last few words, say 3 or 4 seconds of what someone said. You can hear a song, and it just keeps going on in your mind. So you have that ability. So you have to understand that the duration of your working memory, okay, so if you don't encode it or rehearse that information and put it into the long term, as we've said repeatedly, it will disappear. So this working memory, it's limited. It can only handle so much, pretty much about 3 to 12 seconds. It's also limited in capacity. You can store about 7 bits of information. If you think about a phone number is exactly 7 digits. If you tried to remember your credit card information, it would be a lot more difficult for you to do that. You'd really have to work on that. So if you don't even rehearse at all, your short-term working memory may only retain about 4 bits of information. And ironically, what do we always ask to do is give our last 4 digits of our Social Security number. So that can be very helpful. So what happens? Your memory, it has to enter the cortex, and it enters through your senses, and then it's going into the brain's depths. Where it goes depends on the type of information. And as we said in the beginning of the part 1, we talked about amnesia, the loss of memory. So lots of people remember 51st dates. These people do things without having the awareness of having learned them previously. So remember, we have, and when they do things that they've previously learned without remembering, that is implicit, remember, unconscious recognition. All right, so uh, this fact that they can do this challenges the idea that memory is a single unified conscious system. Instead, we seem to have two memory systems operating in tandem. So, whatever has destroyed conscious recall in people with amnesia, it has not destroyed their unconscious capacity for learning. They can learn how to do something, okay? Their implicit memory, that non declarative, will be intact. So, there's a story of a gentleman who was in, I don't know if he had a traumatic brain injury. I don't remember the why, but they taught this gentleman how to draw a star. And the next day, he drew a star again, and every day he would draw a star. And after a number of days, he said, "Wow, isn't this remarkable how well I drew this star without ever having drawn one before?" Because he didn't remember, but his implicit, his unconscious ability had learned this information before. So even though he couldn't consciously remember it, unconsciously it had occurred. So that's interesting. So in this case, there will be no explicit, which is a declarative conscious memory. So that is very interesting to me. So explicit memories, we're splitting between unconscious, implicit, and deliberate, explicit. We split our mental feats, thinking, vision, memory, hearing, into different components for separate and simultaneous processing. So explicit memories for facts and episodes are processed, this is important for you to remember, in the hippocampus part of the brain and fed to other brain regions for storage. Okay? The hippocampus is the temporal lobe neural system that also forms part of the brain's limbic system. And you remember that was about emotions and memory. So, the hippocampus is part of that limbic system, and its functions are learning and memory. So you actually have two hippocampi, one above each ear. Damage to one or the other can produce different results. So this is important. And when people have Alzheimer's and it's moving its way through, and they have, before it gets to the long term, it gets to this hippocampus area, and that's for facts and episodes, and so they cannot remember those things. So that part of that explicit conscious learning is damaged. So that can be a real problem. So that is about as much as we need to know as far as the hippocampus. And where do we store our implicit memories? They are stored in the cerebellum part of the brain. And if you recall from our brain lecture, the cerebellum helps coordinate movement, balance, okay? It interferes with a person's ability to walk, talk, eat, and perform self-care tasks. So it stores the classical conditioning automatic reflex tasks. So you might not, if someone blew air into your eyes and you had damage to your cerebellum, and it was affecting your unconscious memory, if someone blows air into your eyes, you may not blink, because blinking is an automatic thing, but damage to it, It could be very, very debilitating. So lastly, we got to get that information out. We've got to get it out. So memory is recall, getting it out. The ability to retrieve information not in conscious awareness. So, multiple choice questions, test recognition. Fill in the blanks, test recall. So, relearning, do something once, it's easier the second time. So, let's talk about the process of retrieval. And what do we have? We have retrieval cues, things around the target piece that you encoded, associations we form at that time, taste, smell, sights. These are signals. And what do we call this? We call it priming. This is an important terminology, priming, the awakening of associations. Remember that. Awakening of associations. So, and depending on context effects, sometimes you don't remember something. I always give this story about you're upstairs and you're studying, and context effects. You go downstairs because you're hungry and you want to also get a pencil while you're down there. Like, okay, I'll get a snack and I'll get a pencil because I don't have a pencil. You go downstairs, your brother's down there, you start talking about things. You get all involved in the conversation. He's got food out, you start eating, and you run back upstairs and you didn't remember the pencil because when you got downstairs, a whole different context was there with your brother, and so you forgot. So it can affect the way you think. This happens to me in the grocery all the time. I get distracted by other things, context effects, and I don't get the milk, which was what I originally came in for. So moods are also retrieval cues, emotions. So being depressed sours memories by prompting, priming negative associations, which we then use to explain our current mood, or vice versa. A glorious day, okay? So if you're looking over a field and it brings back memories, it can affect your mood for the rest of the day. We talked a little bit about this in the first lecture. This is called mood congruent memory, okay? So we can't remember what we don't encode, and as we get older, we first start to forget things, okay? I joke. I'm 60. I'm like, oh, I'll have a senior moment, but I'm not really having a senior moment, but I'm at the age where I can use it as an excuse. So definitely age affects encoding and efficiency, but you have to really work on it. And as people get older, they have to do tasks that will help them remember, such as, you can learn a new foreign language, Sudoku, crossword puzzles, reading, exercising, eating right, all these things that will help you with your memory as you get older. This is the end of the memory chapter, and you're going to take a quiz at the end of it, and I wish you luck, and I will see you next chapter.